That's a good question. Would God allow someone like this witch to bring Samuel
he's
up?
opposed to.
Yeah, because Samuel was very opposed to witches, mediums, and everything. No, I don't. I don't. But some of the commentators that I was studying this afternoon said, when you look at the scripture, the way it's worded here, Saul says, bring up Samuel, middle of verse 11, or end of verse 11, and it says, when the woman saw Samuel, it doesn't say she did anything. It doesn't say she sat down and crossed her legs and started to hum, or she started a fire. She really didn't do anything. He said, do it, and she saw something. So those who would argue that this was Samuel would say it had nothing to do with her. God wanted to let Samuel come to give a message to Saul. I still lean toward the fact that the woman was a witch and probably was in connection with evil spirits, and this was one impersonating Samuel. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think God would have allowed a woman like this to bring Samuel up. So as you continue to look, though, this is interesting to me. Saul bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Now, I've talked through this, I don't know how many different times, and I never saw this before. But every time an angel was bowed down before, what did they do?
They said, don't do it.
Get up, don't do that. Anytime a human being, one of God's men, was bowed down before, what did they do? Get up, I don't deserve that. On the other hand, Jesus, when people bowed before him, he accepted their worship because he deserved it. Here, Saul has prostrated himself on the ground as an act of submission, as an act of worship, if you will, to a superior being. And this being says nothing to him about lying prostrate.
And Saul, the prophet definitely looked at him.
Yeah, Samuel would have been, Saul, get up. It's me. Sit down, shut your mouth, and listen to what I got to tell you. But he didn't do that. He just said, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? I'm in great distress, Saul said. The Philistines are fighting against me. God has departed from me. He no longer answers me. Poor boy. Don't you feel so sorry for Saul here? He no longer answers me either by prophets or by dreams, so I've called on you to tell me what to do. Now, either the demon is doing a very good job of impersonating Samuel, or it was Samuel. Because listen to what he says. Why do you consult me now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? What are you asking me for? God has turned away from you. And so whether this was an evil spirit or whether it was Samuel, this is true. It is true that God had departed from him, and he had no business asking Samuel what was going on. And, hey, please tell me what to do. The Lord has done what he predicted through me. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Was that true? Yes, it was true. It had been predicted. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce anger against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. Now stop for a second. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me. If this were Samuel, that would indicate that Saul was an obedient person who was going to be in paradise with Samuel the next day. Jonathan, however, on the other hand, definitely would be with Samuel in paradise the next day. And so, again, we're back to, like, which one is it?
Could you also apply what Jesus said when
to the thief on the cross?
Well, the thief on the cross, but also to the young man that asked him, what must I do? But there was some discussion of one of them, and I may have the wrong person, but he said, let the dead bury the dead. Could that apply in some ways? Because if Samuel's been dead and you're conjuring him up, you're supposed to let the dead lie.
Let him be. Let him be. Yep. Let him rest. It might be. It might be. There's a lot of things this tells us. If we back off to the point of looking at it from the writer's perspective, who wrote this story down, it tells us a little bit about what the Jews believed about an afterlife at this point in their time. Because he says, "Why have you called me up?" Evidently, there was a life that he enjoyed after his life on earth, and it was something it was pleasant, and he's almost complaining, "Why did you make me leave all that? To come up and talk to you. You who wouldn't listen. You wouldn't listen to God. You wouldn't listen to me when I told you what God said to do before." And so it's an indication of the fact that they believed in an afterlife, and that they had a very strong belief in an afterlife. And some would look at this and say, well, there's a lot of information here that I wouldn't think a demon would have. Like, for example, that God is going to deliver Israel into the hands of the Philistines tomorrow. You're going to lose the battle tomorrow. Evil spirits are cunning. And we shouldn't think that just because they got it right means that they were godly. They may have simply been able to look at all of the things that have been happening. They certainly have been watching Saul's life, and they certainly know how God treats those people who don't obey him and who don't do what he says to do, particularly those in an important position. And they could also see how many Philistines were gathered there, and they could see how weak the army of Israel. Because listen, the army of Israel was weakened. Anytime you take somebody out who was a key player and loved and appreciated and followed by the army, and you pull them out, make them run for their life, and then you take the very people that they used to go to battle with, the people that used to trust their lives to this man, and say, now you must go and try to kill him. That's causing divisiveness, because I'm certain that many of those men, when Saul said, we're going to go attack David, they're like, why would we not kill David? What David? He was always nice to me. Was he nice to you? I thought he was nice. He's nice to everybody. He was a good leader. God blessed him. Why do we have? And so there was already all this infighting in the ranks and the questioning of Saul's leadership. And so it would not have taken a rocket scientist or a political strategist to look at the situation and see that the unified ranks of the Philistines were going to defeat the people of Israel. So that doesn't necessarily mean anything, nor does it say when he says, tomorrow you will be with me. Now, if it were Samuel, and he said, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me, that could simply mean that they would be with Samuel in the place of the dead. Because the place of the dead, at that point in time, had a torment section, and it had a paradise section.
Front row nosebleed.
What's that?
Front row nosebleed.
Yeah, right. And a lot of people don't understand that. I know quite often when I was teaching through that section in Matthew, and I'd come across some of those things that the kids were like, I've never heard that before. I had one girl argue with me up one side and down the other. She got ugly in class about it. And she came back in kind of sheepishly the next day to class, and she said, I told my mom that we talked about it in class, and she said, yeah, honey, we believe that. So she was kind of apologetic for, but you see, before Jesus rose from the dead, there was a place, according to the story of the rich man and Lazarus, which was not a parable, it was an actual true story. There was a place in the place of the dead, and that was a place where torment was on one side, there was a great gulf in the middle, and then there was paradise. And you might wonder, why? Why did saved people have to go there? It's real simple. Go all the way back to Eden, Garden of Eden. But when you go back to Garden of Eden, take a statement out of Romans with you. If you yield You're the slave of sin. Romans teaches that very strongly in chapter 6. So take that thought with you. Go back to the Garden of Eden. We have mom and dad of the human race, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve have been placed on this earth as Lord Adam and Lady Eve of the earth. And Satan comes into the picture, and Satan tricks them. And Satan causes them to sin. And they become now the servants of sin. Servants of sin do not belong to God anymore. They belong to Satan. And so now, any human being that was born from the union of Adam and Eve, and by the way, that's all of us, every human being is going to be born under the control of Satan, legally under his control. And so when God had righteous people that obeyed him, that looked forward to the coming of Jesus Christ and the sacrifice on the cross, and they would offer the sacrifices that were required of the law, and they were living the best they knew how, when those people died, they still had to go to the only place controlled by Satan. That was the place of the dead. Okay? But God wouldn't let Satan torment them. He let him torment the ones that still belonged to him. But the ones who by faith were looking forward to Jesus, he wouldn't let the devil torment them. So they were in the area called paradise. They called it Abraham's bosom. Now, when Jesus rose from the dead, remember it says that in one of the New Testament epistles, it says that he took captives captive. And he gave gifts unto men. I think it's in Ephesians. What happened was when he died, he paid the price so that those who had been obedient to him didn't have to live under Satan's control anymore. They could be set free. And so when he rose again, he took them with him. And that's where he let some of them stop off in the holy city and talk to family members before they went on to heaven. So now, anytime a person decides they want the control of Jesus Christ in their lives, now when they die, they go to be with him. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. And so we have that hope. But those who are still under the control of Satan when they die, they still go to that same place, the place of torment. That place of torment that was there in the Old Testament is still there now, and it's not going to get emptied out until, I think it's like the end of the millennial reign of Christ. And that's when hell and death and hell give up all the dead that are in them, and the dead, small and great, stand before God. Revelation chapter 20, I believe that is. And after they're judged, then they are cast into the lake of burning sulfur, the lake of fire. And so it's a permanent kind of a thing. Now, that does not mean that if a person has died in the past or dies today, that hell is not permanent for them. It is. It's just like they have a permanent, eternal life sentence, and they start off in the county jail, but then they end up in the federal system. But they can never get out. Either way, there's no way to ever get out. And so that's where when he says, okay, tomorrow you'll be with me, you and your sons will be with me, that takes care of the issue of righteous Jonathan and ungodly Saul. Because they could both be in the place of the dead, and that would have been said truly of them. So, now, and again, it seems like Saul must have gotten up as he was listening to this, because now he falls full length on the ground again. This time, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. His strength was gone. He'd been fasting. And so the woman came to Saul. Now, here's one thing that I kind of set you up for this before, and then I didn't follow up on it. It is also possible that this woman was vindictively goading Saul. She had bitterness toward him. He had kicked out all of her kind. He had banished them from Israel. And so she may have seen an opportunity to kind of, stick it in and dig it around a little bit. And I guess that gives a little credence to the idea that was a third idea that I didn't really mention, and that is that maybe she and some others kind of put on this act just to really, grind his face in the ground, It's like somebody wrestling, they grab somebody and just kind of, rub their face in the ground. So I don't know. I really don't know. Was it a fake setup? Was it an evil spirit? Was it Samuel? I don't know. But I do know that if you get rid of something early in your walk with God because you don't feel like it's right, you should never go back to it. Saul did this. He got rid of it at the beginning, but then he went back to it. I also know that if somebody has reason to be angry at you, you probably shouldn't trust any advice they give you. She had a lot of reason to be angry at him, and yet he's going to her saying, oh, bring up Samuel for me. I need your help. Don't put yourself in that kind of a situation. And so now the woman seems to be overwhelmed by the fact that, for this poor guy, now he's just kind of almost passed out on the ground. And so she comes and she sees he's really shook up. And she said, look, I obeyed you. I took my life in my hands. I did what you told me to do. Now that would make me go back to what James was talking about before. Would God let her bring up Samuel? Even though it doesn't say it earlier, it just says that she saw Samuel. Here she says to him, I did what you told me to do. So that would cause me to again think, like I did before, that it was very likely an evil spirit that was in cahoots with her. So she said, now, please listen to me. Listen to your servant. Let me give you some food so you can eat and have strength to go on your way. Refused. Not going to do it. But his men joined the woman in urging him, and he listened to them. So he got up from the ground, and he sat on the couch. And now we have what, if you think of it in prison terminology, this is his last meal before his execution. Sounds like a pretty decent meal, too. She had a fattened calf at the house. Now, calves they're good size. They may not be as big as a full cow, but a calf would have an awful lot of meat. She had this fattened calf, not just a skinny little calf, a fattened calf, and she butchered it at once. She took some flour, she made some bread without yeast, and she set it before Saul and his men, and they ate. That was quite a meal. It was quite an elaborate, it was a big lot of meat. They must have really been meat eaters back in those days. If you remember that one time, it's been maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were talking about the one battle where Jonathan had started it off, and during that battle, Saul had said, nobody's going to eat or drink anything until I'm avenged of my enemies. And when it came down to the evening, the men were just cutting the chunks out of the cows and just eating them. They were eating the meat with the blood in it. They really seemed to be meat eaters. And here, they're eating quite a meal. And then it says that the same night, they got up and left. Saul's about to be executed, really. By the Lord, by the Philistines. But remember what David had said 2 different times now. David had the opportunity to ram a spear through Saul's heart. And David said, I'm not going to do it. He said to Saul, may the Lord judge between me and you. Now, whatever you think of capital punishment, I think we would all have to agree that God, the giver of life, has the right to take life. And when he sees fit, we don't quite often, most of the time, we don't know. I wouldn't know any time, really. But God does know. And so now Saul is going out the next day, and when we get into chapter 30 and 31, we're going to find this next day, that was Saul's last good meal, and then he's off with the army the next day. Well, then we've got to back up now to Ziklag, and we'll have time just to introduce this thought and what's going on here. Remember, David was with Achish, And they're all moving with the force of the Philistines. They're getting ready to go and attack. And David's like, all right, let's go. Come on, I'll show you what I can do. And he's got his 600 men with him. And now they've got they're all gathered at Aphek. And that seems to be a pretty significant place. You remember they had a battle at Aphek way back in the beginning of 1 Samuel. And that was where the Ark of the Covenant was captured. And it was a battle of the Philistines against the Israelites. And here they are back at that same place again. And the Israelites are not far away. They're by the spring in Jezreel. And as the Philistine rulers march with their units of hundreds and thousands, David and his men are marching at the rear with Achish. The commanders of the Philistines are like, whoa, 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 hold on. What about these Hebrews? Achish said, is this not David, who was an officer of Saul, king of Israel? He's already been with me for over a year, and from the day he left Saul until now, I have found no fault in him. Now, David had been deceiving him. We know that. But he's convinced. But the Philistine commanders, they're like, you're stupid. What are you doing? Send him back. Let him return to the place you assigned him. He must not go with us into battle, or he will turn against us during the fighting. How better could he regain his master's favor than by taking the heads of our own men? And so, they know David's reputation. They talk about it in verse 5. So Achish calls David, and this is where we're going to end. Achish says to David, as surely as the Lord lives, you have been reliable, and I would be pleased to have you serve with me in the army. From the day you came until today, I found no fault in you, but the rulers, they don't approve. Turn back and go in peace. We're not going to upset them. I'm not going to upset the apple cart. Now watch David here. David's like, what have I done? What? Haven't I been faithful? What have you found against me? What have I done wrong? Why can't I go and fight against the enemies of my Lord the king? He's a suck-up, wasn't he? Kiss up. I want to go fight against the enemies of my Lord the king. No, you don't, David. You're just putting on an act here. Now listen, this is where, remember I told you that I felt like that Achish may have been influenced to have faith in Jehovah? Here's where I get that. Achish answered, I know that you have been as pleasing in my eyes as an angel of God. That from a pagan king. Where in the world did he ever think about talking about an angel of God unless David had had an influence on this king? And I believe he did, and I believe there's evidence of that. And I've mentioned it to you before, but the Kerethites and Pelethites, they were Philistines, and they became David's most honored bodyguard and stayed with him the entire time that he was as the king. And so, hey, they said you can't go, so you need to head home. And so David gets up and he goes home. So that'll put us into chapters 30 and 31 the next time we meet, which will be 2 weeks from tonight because of the special activity that's going on next week. So.
2 quick thoughts that came to my mind.
Yes.
That could lead credence to it being a demon and not.
Okay.
Other than what we talked about is, the demonic forces were angels. They knew what could happen. So maybe that was why he saw it. Because they had been through it. They had been there and fallen away.
Certainly.
Took the wrong side. So maybe that's how they saw it. But also, you could kind of make an argument that Saul took pagan meat. Because we don't, being that it wasn't clean, we don't know that it fit the Mosaic law.
Yeah. Might have, but it might not have.
Because, so that's just something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts or questions before we wrap
What's
up?
going on next Wednesday?
Next Wednesday, they're having I think for lack of a better term, it's like a baby shower for Isaac and Libby. They're going to be going to get their little girl from Thailand real soon. So next Wednesday night will be kind of an all-church shower. Not water shower, like a baby shower. So.
Mary,
Yeah.
one thing that runs in my mind about this, we have this lady fixed for
Yeah, uh-huh.
That'd be a good time for the poison.
It would have been, wouldn't it? Yeah.
I wonder if he had his men eat some of it first, see if they got over there, or he.
He really put himself at risk by going to her. In so many different ways, that being definitely one of them. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay, let's bow our heads. Father in heaven, thank you for allowing us tonight the opportunity to experience a little bit of David's life. And as things are kind of bottoming out now and about to start up, I just pray that you'd help us to learn from this man who someday we'll get to meet. We'll get to meet him in heaven. It'll be a neat thing. Maybe we can spend some time hearing stories from his own mouth. And I just pray that you'd help us to love you like David did. Yeah, he had some problems here, but we have problems. The Lord, help us to love you. So we give ourselves to you and pray your hand to rest upon us this week. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Y'all have a good week.
You too.